part of it is this rush to just, quote, do something on AI at this early phase. They're worried that if we don't regulate immediately some of these proponents of this approach, that we'll have missed our moment and it'll be too late for these AI models, either in their opinion, again, maybe drawing inspiration from some of these science fiction novels, but they fear that AI will be out of control and then we'll have missed our chance to protect Americans.
Hello and welcome to another Breakdown with the American Legislative Exchange Council. I'm Lars Staleside, and with me today is ALEC's Communications and Technology Task Force Director, Jake Morabito. Jake, thank you for sitting down with us today.
Thanks for having me on, Lars. Excited for this conversation today.
Well, it's you. We were talking earlier this month about what was going on, what we're looking forward to, and it felt like it would be a good idea to be able to maybe give people an idea of actually what we saw happening in 2024 and then what we're looking forward to in 2025. But I would think that the first thing on everybody's mind when it comes to this stuff is AI, artificial intelligence. There was a lot of activity we saw in the States.
It was completely unprecedented in my experience. I've been doing public policy in the tech arena for about 10 years now, and there was, by some estimates, almost 700 unique state bills alone trying to regulate artificial intelligence in some fashion. That's not even counting the over 100 bills filed at the federal level and even at the local or city level, and not to mention what our friends or foes are doing on the global stage. You had 45 states file bills, but the only states that didn't file bills were those that didn't have session in 2020. So that gives you a sense of just how popular this topic was for our state legislators across the country, blue or red states.
Now, is this a popularity because they're looking to jump on a bandwagon, or is it something where there's something that the states are truly trying to accomplish?
Sure. So we just commemorated the second anniversary of ChatGPT coming on the scene, and that was really an inflection point in just how far artificial intelligence technology has advanced in such a short period of time. Till then, it was kind of a buzzword in the software space. People threw around that term, but then ChatGPT really made it real for what this technology could be doing for everyday consumers, for businesses, and there are some legitimate concerns with how capable these AI models have become. I am personally an optimist in what AI can do to help support businesses, really give everyday people an opportunity, really democratize and decentralize a lot of powers and disrupt a lot of existing spaces and really promote American ingenuity at its best. Now, obviously, that causes some fear as far as illegal activity or potential bad actors abusing the technology.
Well, you know where I always go with this. Skynet.
Of course you would do that.
So what are the protections against Skynet?
So one thing I would say is don't use science fiction movies as your inspiration. I have to remember it didn't happen. It's a movie. It's a compelling movie. And maybe there are some, things to take away from it, but I wouldn't write your state's public policy based on a science fiction novel. Look at what's on the ground and look at what's actually happening. A lot of industries are really taking this up. It hasn't resulted in mass job loss. I know that's one of the things at the top of everyone's mind is how does automation impact jobs, both in the near term and in the long term. We haven't seen mass layoffs, but it's still something at the top of everyone's mind. A lot of states are trying to regulate what they call consequential decision-making in artificial intelligence, essentially certain protected fields like healthcare or insurance or even things like water access or electricity access.
Yeah, but in all fairness, we're not even at the first pitch of the first inning of the baseball game.
You're right.
We are really, really, really it's not even the baby stepping, we're baby crawling right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the states trying to do? I think most of the activity that we've seen has mainly been out west.
That's right. So again, every state has pretty much filed something on AI. Some of those, the typical suspects, your California, New York, Illinois, Connecticut, they've been advancing legislation that would really restrict how AI could be used, like I was mentioning earlier, in different sectors or different uses that are permitted versus not permitted under state law. So what's really being threatened is this patchwork of state-by-state regulations that our AI innovators would have to comply with. And part of what's so problematic is a lot of these laws would not be regulating bad conduct. Like I mentioned, there are some harms that could be addressed with legislation. And oftentimes existing legislation already covers illegal activity or harms that can be used. But these laws are regulating AI technology itself. And a lot of the ways that AI is defined in these bills, it's such a broad definition of computing or software, again, like using things like algorithms, which is present in virtually all computer software today. So you really threaten to have this really sweeping internet regulation in states like California that'll set the tone in a negative way for our AI innovation compared to where we could be going, which is surpassing Europe, surpassing China, and our foes across the world.
Right, because Colorado had some sort of an algorithmic based bill that went through, right?
That's correct. Theirs was one of the only ones that actually was signed into law. And it's really telling because Governor Polis in his signing statement even said this bill has some serious issues with it and the legislature needs to come back in 2025 and fix those issues. So why he signed it, I mean...
I was going to ask. So, why? I mean, I've always heard the term, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. But we're talking about laws and regulations and things that are truly going to affect people's lives here. Why do you affect something that this isn't right, but we'll get it right next?
Well, I think part of it is this rush to just, quote, do something on AI at this early phase. They're worried that if we don't regulate immediately some of these proponents of this approach, that we'll have missed our moment and it'll be too late for these AI models, either in their opinion, again, maybe drawing inspiration from some of these science fiction novels, but they fear that AI will be out of control and then we'll have missed our chance to protect Americans. And I don't think that is the right take. I think we need to be really encouraging the development in this technology. And fortunately, there are some states like Utah and Texas as well that have really pioneered the right approach. How can we use AI to empower everyday consumers, support entrepreneurs, help government be more efficient? There's a lot of talk in DC these days about government efficiency. AI can really help save taxpayer dollars, can reduce headcount of some of these agencies where you have some of them still relying on fax machines, still relying on phone communications, where maybe an AI chatbot cleverly deployed can assist agencies while actually being more responsive and more effective to constituents.
But ALEC also has a biopolicy, kind of a toolkit, a blueprint based on one of the other states. Is one of the Western states one of their laws?
Right. Utah did pioneer this alternative approach, which again is trying to really increase the legislature's capacity to understand artificial intelligence. There's a lot of confusion and kind of misunderstanding about what exactly AI is and what it isn't. So this would create an advisory body within the legislature to provide recommendations to the legislature on how to regulate, maybe how to remove burdensome regulations. It would also convene stakeholders from across both government, academia, but also private industry and other stakeholder groups on how can we develop legislation on AI that encourages innovation, doesn't punish our innovators, and it's really been positive in Utah. They enacted the law earlier this year, and they've been setting up what they call their artificial intelligence learning laboratory. And their first case study that they studied was the intersection of mental health and AI. So in other words, that's a hot button topic, healthcare, as far as lots of opportunities maybe to use it beneficially. But again, people are afraid of if it's abused, what would that mean? So they brought in a bunch of psychologists, psychiatrists, other kind of related organizations and institutions in that industry. And so they gathered a bunch of information to give the Utah legislature the full picture. And I think that model could be really distributed well across the United States. So that way people are developing informed legislation on AI instead of some of these rushed, maybe approaches like California that haven't been fully thought through or again, very favorable in one industry versus another. It's a great first step for any state wishing to really make their mark on AI.
Okay, well, sort of in the same arena, but not quite the same subject. There's also a lot of movement when it comes to online safety for kids, especially when they're dealing with the different social media platforms. I think we saw stuff in Florida, California, New York, a number of different states.
Yes, this has continued to be a major topic in state legislatures. Again, there's been some legislation introduced at the federal level, and namely the Kids Online Safety Act, but that, at least as of this recording, has not yet passed. So states are taking up this issue, and I think at least almost a dozen have actually passed laws either restricting children's ability to use social media platforms or requiring mandatory age verification in order to get on social media platforms, which raises its own kind of concerns about privacy and data protection.
I was going to say, that sounds like it's a stumbling block of its own.
Right. And again,
I don't think I had an ID until I got my
But
learner's
you did
permit.
too. So you're talking about birth certificates, passports, other sensitive.
We're going to put those online for 12-year-olds?
Right. I mean, and at least the letter of these laws, they say that they're only used to do the verification, and then they'll delete them. But I mean, if one bad actor or if one company messes it up on accident, a lot of them are saying they don't want to be custodians of this sensitive information.
No.
So Florida, again, they passed legislation HB3 earlier this year, but they aren't the only ones, and a lot of these are being challenged in the court system. So ALEC's approach, instead of maybe requiring some of these harsher, restrictive, there's a less restrictive approach available, which is how do we support our parents, empower them, and educate children on the responsible use of this technology.
Okay, then keeping the screen time down, certain number of hours a day, different locations where you can actually access.
I mean, we at ALEC, we think those decisions are best handled by the parents. They ultimately, especially when this kind of cross-pollinates with the school choice conversation about it's ultimately parents and caregivers that know the environment and what's the right level for their own children. Each family is different. Each environment is different. It shouldn't be some bureaucrat in a state capital making these decisions. So one thing that ALEC has done is how do we increase support in the school system, but also give parents awareness of these public sector or these tools that are already available on the open market to help parents regulate content for their children online. These are, like you mentioned, different screen time restrictions, or maybe different settings that restrict who can send them direct messages, try and limit things like cyberbullying. There's so many resources out there that are many of them free of charge for things like cell phones, even your internet routers, social media platforms. There's so much available. There's just not a lot of uptick in adoption and even awareness that these tools exist.
Yeah. But along those same lines, though, it's not just limiting the access to these different platforms or websites or wherever they're going to go, but it's when they can do it. Like specifically, I know in the Commonwealth here, Governor Youngkin signed something about the ability to use different technology in the schools, what the kids are going allowed to access through their phones and laptops and tablets and whatnot.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting how that's kind of an offshoot of this conversation, is you have this parallel issue of cell phones and other personal devices in schools, which has become more prevalent, again, as technology has advanced. A lot of this has been introduced in the school system, which has been a large benefit, in fact, as far as, expanding knowledge or, resources available to teachers as well as students, to access lesson plans they may not have had otherwise. There's some really great tools available like Khan Academy that, help students with study materials or video lessons plan. It really helps learners of all types access this technology. So what we don't want to get lost in this conversation is the beneficial ed tech. But there is this conversation about personal cell phones in schools. Are they causing a distraction? So some states and local governments and school districts are passing new policies to varying degrees, some of which kind of on the more extreme end of the spectrum. They're calling it a bell-to-bell ban, which essentially from the first bell of the day to the last bell of the day as an absolute restriction on any use of a personal cell phone or other electronic device. Some have a more moderated approach where maybe it's only during instructional time. So when the teacher has begun their lesson, students have to stow away their technology either in some sort of a pouch or a locker or in their backpack, and then maybe they have some limited access to their device at lunch. So one thing why I think some sort of middle ground is beneficial is some parents do like that communication with their children. Maybe if it's, coordinating pickup, or maybe some teenagers have other obligations and responsibilities like an after-school job or sports, and they need to keep in touch with their parents as far as what's changing. Also emergency situations, that's something that's often raised. And I think there is some middle ground to be had there instead of an absolute ban. And again, allowing parents, schools, and local communities to make those decisions, not a one-size-fits-all state government regulation.
Now, see, for me, I would think that you just turn the school into one big Faraday cage. So as the kids walk in, and boom, it all goes dark. Because, I come from the time where, of course, the only phones that we had were hanging on the wall. So if parents were going to get in touch with you there, they had to call the office, and the office had to send somebody down to your classroom and get you from there.
Yes.
Enough of that. And, that seemed to work fine enough. This want, this need. I realize these are now parents that have grown up with the digital side of things, whereas, that wasn't really, my parents obviously didn't grow up with that.
I think you're hitting on a great point. Is it's kind of a whack-a-mole approach, and things keep changing. This is the same problem, reiterated over and over again. There's always been distractions in the classroom. They just haven't always been cell phones. So that's why I think the focus on teaching responsible use, teaching children both in the school system and at home with their parents, what is the right use of technology? What's the ethical use of technology? What are some of the risks involved as far as overusing technology, or maybe cybersecurity or cyberbullying risks? What's a responsible use as far as building your resume and building your LinkedIn profile, in a productive way? So there are positive and negative uses of tech that we need to educate our children on.
And those are the big things that are happening in 24. I mean, I know that we did hit some of the other stuff, like there's the broadband access that's going through. There's the CBDCs. There's a lot of states that have acted on
central bank digital currency.
Central bank didn't mean to get caught up in the jargon overall. Are those on the forefront of 2025? Are we going back to more AI? What are we looking at? What's going to happen in 2025? Where's the focus going to be?
Well, it's really exciting. We have a new administration coming into the White House in 2025, in case anyone hasn't heard. But I think that's really going to set a new tone as far as state policy as well. A lot of states, with kind of inaction or even hostile posture towards the technology industry, it's been really a tough road for some of these companies as far as, again, they're really concerned as China continues to, threaten American dominance in technology. And it's not just China, it's also some rivals in, Southeast Asia, or even countries like the United Arab Emirates that are coming online with their own AI models and such like that. It's really imperative that America leads this new era of innovation in tech. I think the President-elect Trump has nominated or appointed some excellent people to guide that conversation in a free market, limited government manner, like Brendan Carr at the FCC. Will really kind of get us back to basics as far as you mentioned broadband earlier. How do we get back to actually building things in the United States again and expanding broadband?
And is it going to be a conflict of interest with Elon's involvement in the elections versus his involvement in the administration versus, instead of laying cable all across the Appalachia, as it were, it would be much easier to give them something like Starlink?
Well, I think the free market is that would be an excellent way to go, is instead of some of these Biden-era regulations favoring one type of technology over another, we should be considering novel solutions like Starlink or other satellite or other providers. Wireless technology has made huge strides in recent years as far as delivering home Wi-Fi to people through things like 5G. All of that should be on the table. If they meet the federal benchmark for what's considered broadband, why aren't we doing that today? Instead of, we'd allocated $40 billion 3 years ago, for broadband, and still not one home has been connected. I think that's a travesty. We need to cut the red tape, and we need to actually build again.
What is the big, when it comes to that? I know we're sidetracking a little bit, but what is the big hiccup when it comes to actually allocating that $45 billion?
Sure. Well, one thing that's unfortunate is as the federal government has been doling out these grants, they've been handcuffing states with these progressive policy priorities on things like mandatory union labor requirements or things climate or DEI related requirements that were not in the original legislation. And some of the authors of the legislation on the Republican side have been pointing that out, that this is in clear contradiction of the goals of the program as envisioned by.
So they're adding additional restrictions and able to.
And I think that's something that the new FCC and the new NTIA, which is part of the Commerce Department, that's something that they could do to help get this program moving, is maybe we don't need some of these restrictions. Like, again, as far maybe some of these more remote places, which again is where this broadband access is needed the most. Maybe they don't have the labor base there as far as union labor to actually even build out this broadband. So you're undercutting your own program with these restrictions. And when we should be focusing on speed and, again, efficiency, and can they actually do the job, then they should get the contract.
Simple enough, but simple in government is hardly ever put together, especially when it comes to regulations. Well, Jake, I appreciate you sitting down and giving us the breakdown overall of what we saw last year, what we're going to see next year, and what hopefully artificial intelligence has in store down the line. The American Legislative Exchange Council on Morrisdale side.